correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I am your host, Steve, here with Steve.
Hello.
And today, we're going to talk about... Well, first, let's talk about our podcast of the week, and then we'll talk about what you did without me.
Yeah, well, with your permission.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
but you don't work. You were on vacation.
Yeah, well, I paid for my vacation in advance, but...
Yeah. So let's talk about the podcast of the week.
All right.
So we're talking about Shared Sagas.
Ah, the boys from Down Under.
Yeah, I haven't listened to much of their podcast, but from what I've listened to, I like the fact that they're sort of like me and that they have ADD when it comes to games.
Yeah, they play a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, they bounce around a lot, and I like it because it gives me ideas like, ooh, steal that, play that, add that to the list. Also, as a side, reading 3 RPGs at the same time is a bad time.
Yeah.
Well, I should say reading 3 very different RPGs at the same time can get confusing.
I can see that.
But anyways, so you did an interview without me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a problem with that because I'm actually kind of terrible at interviews.
Well, I'm not all that great myself, but I'll just talk, and for some reason people talk with me.
So, tell me about who you interviewed a little bit. Let's get into that.
Well, it ended up not going quite as planned, but I sat down with Opti and Mr. Johnson, who are from the Neo-Anarchist and Arcology podcast, respectively, which are both Shadowrun podcasts. And then I found out a couple other things about them. One being that I guess Opti's the one who actually started it. He started his own gaming company. And, let me back this up a second. First off, yes, they're both massively into Shadowrun. They both actually work as freelancers for Catalyst Game Labs. And in addition to doing all of that, there's going to be a lot of links in the show notes this week, folks, because these people do lots and lots of cool stuff. But they're on about 4 or 5 different podcasts, a couple of YouTube channels. But in addition to all that, Opti decided to start his own game company called Fragging Unicorn Games. Well, their main product, and we talk about it a little bit in the interview, but if you really want to hear about it, because it's a mini skirmish game, and I don't know a ton about minis. Just, that's me.
Yeah, I heard the guys over at Squad Tactica talk to him about it.
Yeah, so I hooked them up with Squad Tactica, and that interview actually dropped, well, when you hear this, it'll be last week.
Yeah, at the time of recording, it just dropped today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really cool. Honestly, kind of like you, I didn't have any frame of reference when it came to Shadowrun.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've listened to your interview. I haven't made it the whole way through, but I've listened to the interview, and I could tell you that it's going to be an interesting one. They bring up some good points, and
yeah,
basically talking about Shadowrun, which is a game system that the setting never piqued my interest enough to grab, but hearing them talk about it, I can completely understand why people were interested in it.
Oh, yeah, the setting, the game's currently on its 6th edition, but the lore has maintained from when it first came out in 89 all the way through currently. So, the lore for this game has been built over, 30 plus years now, and it's really rich and it's really detailed. And then actually, there's a fantasy game based off of long before Shadowrun called Earth Dawn, which we mentioned a time or two. But in any case, like I said, I was supposed to sit down with both of them. Well, due to something, confusion.
We usually call that shenanigans.
Yes, well, I think we've tried to blame the technomancers for this one.
Okay.
Mr. Johnson wasn't there when we were going to start, so, okay. Opti and I were like, he's like, yeah, I'll message him. Well, he messaged him and nothing. So we start about, 45 minutes in, he pops in. And so we just kind of kept going. And then Opti had to leave. And so I finished out talking with Mr. Johnson about, well, I'm going in circles here, but so they have this minis game coming out. That's called Gangs of the Undercity. Their next kind of big project is an RPG in the same world as this minis game called Subversion, which sounds really, really cool. You'll hear about it in the interview. And so I was talking with both of them about that. And then after Opti left, I ended up talking with Mr. Johnson some more about another side project he has going, which is actually kind of loosely based off of Morkborg. So I think y'all find this really entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the interview. All right, folks. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a game that's been around for quite a long time. It's a game called Shadowrun. Originally came out, I believe, in 1989. And here to talk with me today about it is someone who's been around the game for quite a long time, does some podcasting, and I believe also does some writing work for it. Joined today by Opti.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have someone on who knows something about a game that, well, I've been aware of it for quite some time. I've never actually gotten the chance to play, although I believe I did build an Earth Dawn character once in something like 1996.
You were getting close. You were approaching Shadowrun. So yeah, I like Shadowrun so much that I created a Shadowrun lore podcast. And then I created a Shadowrun actual play podcast, and somewhere along the line started working for Catalyst Game Labs and writing Shadowrun, writing some of the splat books, and even became a developer on Shadowrun 6th World Edition, which just recently came out, I think, last year. So yeah, Shadowrun is now in my blood. I'm all in it, and I'm sort of a soft ambassador for all things Shadowrun and cyberpunk fantasy.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, that's kind of what we were looking for, because part of what we want to do as a podcast is show people other games and other settings and so forth that's out there. And like I told you when we were chatting before we started recording, I both myself and the other Steve were both big fans of Cyberpunk 2020 or now Red.
Sure.
But Shadowrun is a game that has, I believe, within months of the same heritage as far as time since development, and probably has a significant amount more published for it.
Oh yeah, Shadowrun at one point in the last few years was the number 3 RPG, I think, that was selling. I mean, of course, now things are much, much different. The landscape has shifted. But yeah, Shadowrun has been pretty popular for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, the pitch that I used to hear back in the mid 90s was, well, it's cyberpunk with magic. But I think, as with anything, if that's your quick pitch, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just that.
Absolutely. So yes, cyberpunk / fantasy is the easiest way to say it, but you've got near future fictional universe, cybernetics, magic, fantasy creatures, orcs, elves, dwarfs, that sort of stuff. Urban fantasy, you've got crime, you've got noir, conspiracy, horror, detective stuff. I mean, it's basically one of my friends who also writes for Shadowrun, Russell Zimmerman. He likes to say that any movie that Keanu Reeves has been in, you can do in Shadowrun.
Well, considering, I spent an episode not too long ago discussing Kevin Costner in post-apocalyptic movies, I guess it fits. So, I mean, I guess as someone who's very familiar with it, is there a quick elevator pitch to Shadowrun other than what you just described?
Yeah, I would say something like in Shadowrun, you take the role of Shadowrunners who basically do illegal or quasi-legal things for money, but you also subvert the corporations that are hiring you to do these jobs. And along the way, you're going to use your team and your magic and your cybernetics to get the job done.
Okay, so it's in some ways leverage with, say, Dresden Files tacked on?
That is, yeah. And, a little bit of the Matrix, a little bit of Lord of the Rings, and a little bit of Leverage. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Fair enough. So, I mean, I guess maybe, where do you think we ought to start? Should we discuss a little bit of the system before we get into lore? Because if you're used to, be it Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or most other games, I'm familiar enough with the game to know that it is mechanically not really all that similar to any of those.
Correct. Now, I will say this, that, and again, I think my Shadowrun love credentials are on the table, so hope nobody shoots me for saying this, but nobody plays Shadowrun because of the system. People play Shadowrun because the world and the lore are so fantastic. So we can talk about the system, and we can talk about some of the cool stuff it does. We could even talk about some of the issues, but just know that the system has been getting critique since first edition.
Oh, I'm sure. And as a confessed fan of the Rifts world, if you're familiar at all with that, the feeling is familiar. I
Sure.
love that world, but the system gives me headaches. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, basically my knowledge of Shadowrun is that it is a D6 dice pool system, and you need a whole lot of D6 to play it.
Correct. You will essentially, the basic mechanic of the game is that you will be rolling a number of dice equal to your attribute plus your skill, and then fives or sixes will be hits. So you can sometimes, like, say you have a 7 in your strength, and this is a bad example because sixth edition doesn't do this anymore, but you have a 7 in strength and a 7 in melee skill. You'll be rolling 14 dice, and that's before any other of bonuses that you might get from other things. So yeah, you can roll upwards of 20 dice fairly easily on any given roll in Shadowrun. And that's,
And
of course, if it's an opposed roll, then your opponent's also rolling, so many dice, and it can get a little bit clackly on the table.
yeah, well, though it doesn't sound, at least on that particular thing, though, unlike some games where there's a lot of math involved, you're not actually totaling up the dice. You're just looking to see which one's got, as you said, 5 or higher. So it's not as math heavy as even, say, Dungeons and Dragons, where you're adding up a bunch of numbers. You're just going, oh, this is higher, this is higher, this is higher, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them.
Yeah, pretty much. It can get a little bit complicated. Like, it has a lot of different systems in it beyond the basic system. So, for example, if you wanted to be a hacker, which are called deckers in Shadowrun, that is a completely other minigame with its own different rules and its own sort of system of doing things. Also uses the same basic system, but you have to learn a whole new vocabulary, and it sort of takes the decker away from the table for a while everybody else. The joke is, like, if when it's the decker's turn, everybody else is going to go out for pizza. But yeah, like I said, it can be a little bit complicated, but the dice rolling part is not the complicated part.
Yeah. Now, just to go off down a little tangent here, because, well, that's what we do. But the one critique I've heard a lot about Cyberpunk 2020, and I've heard it from myself to boot, is that and you just alluded to it, is that the decking or net running is rather complicated. But my contention, at least with Cyberpunk 2020, was partially because this game was written before the internet as we know it now was a thing. So
Yeah.
it's not just trying to mechanize something that very few people are going to talk openly about, but it's also trying to create an entertaining game out of something that you don't really have a frame of reference for.
Yeah. I think Shadowrun did the exact same thing. Cyberpunk has the benefit of not having so many editions and so many books, in between then and now. But from what I understand, and I haven't seen Cyberpunk Red up close, but it is a more streamlined version than Shadowrun's hacking system, which again is just sort of always a bugbear, right? It's a system that has grown and has fiction around it, and it's hard to change now that sixth edition's worth of baggage is coming with it. So yeah, it's I think in both of the games, I agree with you. They suffer from a sort of late 80s idea of what hacking and computers networks will be.
Yeah, trying to predict the future that has become ubiquitous but wasn't there to.
Right. Trying to take something that's very mundane to us and make it somehow more exciting. Like in Leverage, I mean, like, it was, the hacker was never going into cyberspace, right? Like, hacking has become just so different than what we expected. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, very much so. So I mean, I guess it's kind of a side thing, But again, I've said before, I don't think you can fault games for using the frame of reference of when they were written. It's just what was, and that's all you can work with.
Yeah.
That being said, to dive back into a little more system wise, now you have games like D&D and Pathfinder and whatever are very much class based games and tend to be, I would say, much more focused on your attributes of your character, where you have other games like, say, Call of Cthulhu, or in the case of Cyberpunk 2020, where I think they focus much more on your skills and are not as class driven. Where does Shadowrun fall in that sort of frame?
Shadowrun it's not a class-based system at all. It is a very skill-based system. But having said that, there are archetypes that Shadowrun assumes that you will have. So, for example, if you don't have a Decker, there's going to be a huge portion of the game that your team doesn't have access to. If you don't have a mage or a shaman on your team, you're going to run into problems. If you don't have a street samurai or an adept, you're not going to be able to handle the fighting bits as much. So Shadowrun does assume that somewhere along the line, no matter what skills your people take, they will be taking skills that allow them to fill certain roles.
So what I'm sounding like is, so to speak, you have almost careers or paths, if you will, that the characters follow, that this guy specializes in this kind of thing and this guy specializes in this kind of thing. And
Yeah.
if you don't have that specialization, you don't have access to the finer points of that, we'll say.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So, for example, if you don't have a Decker, then any sort of matrix runs, right? Any sort of hacking runs or any sort of runs that require a Decker to turn the cameras off or erase the footage, right? You're just going to be a little bit behind the eight ball. And likewise, if you run into some magical enemies and you don't have anybody who can counter that magic on your team, it's going to be an uphill battle for you.
So without a Decker, you have to go to the Han Solo communications disabling route.
Exactly. Yes. Lots of boring conversations anyway, right?
Do we maybe next go to, do you want to give like a quick overview of what these archetypes are? I mean, I know some of them, from what you've mentioned here, you've got your street samurai, your Decker, your adept, and so on. But again, I don't know Shadowrun itself all that well.
Sure. So essentially, the archetypes, depending on exactly what edition you're going for, also might include some of the races as well. So in Shadowrun, you have humans, elves, orcs, dwarfs, and trolls. Those are the basic 5 races in Shadowrun. And then your character will be put together, ideally, so that you can hit a bunch of different archetypes. So, for example, you have a street samurai, which is sort of one of the main 3 archetypes of the game. And a street samurai is somebody who has lots of cyberware, but they also have a sort of code that they live by. So they can kick a lot of ass, but they don't kick everyone's ass, right? They're sort of, that's where the samurai part comes from. You also have deckers, which use cyber decks to do the hacking. You have street mages who use hermetic magic to do their thing. You have street shamans who sort of focus on a more connected to the earth or connected to a totem sort of magic. You have riggers who are similar to deckers, but they focus more on drones and jacking into vehicles and those sort of things. You also have adepts, which are sort of physical mages. They channel their magic into doing certain feats physically. You can have physical adepts like a sword adept or a gun adept who are just, really, really good, magically good at those certain things. And I think rounding those out, you would have a face, who is basically like, if you remember A-Team, right? Face. Or in Leverage, Sophie would be a sort of face. So those are the basic archetypes, and you've got some other ones too, sort of secondary archetypes like smugglers. But yeah, those are the main ones.
Okay. So now clearly party concept is going to play a pretty big role in a game of this, I would assume, and that there are certain, be it, you need muscle, a face, and then some of this other stuff. like you mentioned, the deckers, perhaps not for every game or every campaign, but it's one of those things that, look, if we're going to play games about future and computers and a wild, crazy internet, why wouldn't you want to play that, right?
Yeah. Like if you don't have any magic characters and if you don't have any deckers, your game is going to be a very limited game for what you can bring, to from the Shadowrun world. The Shadowrun world is vast. So you're essentially cutting yourself off. Or if you just want to kill your party, that's I guess you could do that too.
Well, I mean, that's, yeah, I guess. So, like, does Shadowrun then, from playing it at the table, does it work better maybe with a little bit larger group and more diverse roles? Or is it more where you just kind of, when you're getting ready to play, you need to go, okay, we want to cover this base, this base, this base, and this base because that'll let us have the most fun?
Well, I can never follow my own advice, so all of my games end up blowing up to, 6 or 7 or 8 people, but I think Shadowrun works pretty well with 4 players, and I think that what happens when you have 4 players is the characters end up doing a little bit of double duty. So you
Hmm.
have a sort of combo street samurai and decker, or you have a combination shaman who can also be a face, those sort of things. So as long as you have all of the skills represented, the archetypes don't matter as much as long as you can sort of fill in where necessary. Which actually, if I'm being honest, characters sort of come out of character generation as the characters they're going to be. There's not a whole lot of growth in Shadowrun characters because it's so expensive to grow to grow in what you're good at. But you can, as you grow your character, you can pick up new skills because new skills are really cheap. So that's sort of how it plays out. You go on a run, you realize, oh shoot, that went really badly because we didn't have X. And so you'll spend the next couple of sessions in downtime getting X, just so that you aren't caught with your pants down during the next run.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. So back to mechanics a little bit then. Now, what I gather then, and this goes with what vaguely sticks in my memory, is Shadowrun is not a level based game at all.
Correct. There's one small asterisk, and that is magic-based characters can sort of level up. They have initiation rituals, right? And they become level 1 initiates or level 2 initiates, but it's nothing like leveling up in D&D or Pathfinder, those traditional class-based games, yeah. It's much more simulationist than those other games, yeah.
Okay. Which again, I think goes back to that late '80s, '90s heritage where you had D&D and a whole bunch of games that were trying to be very simulationist, and some of them have survived and some didn't.
Sure.
So I guess then for a lot of people, it's fairly easy to imagine the tech stuff given the amount of it that's in movies and so forth. But generally speaking, magic systems, I mean, in my experience, they vary tremendously from role playing game to role playing game. So, and it
Yeah.
sounds like with Shadowrun, you're saying that there's almost two completely separate magic systems here too, and that you've got your mages, sounds almost like it's more of a stereotypical arcane magic, and then you have a more, I think you mentioned shamans, which I'm guessing is much more of a naturalistic, maybe even some Native American flavor to it. Is that at all correct?
Yeah, so it does have well, I should say traditionally had a Native American flavor to it. I think they sort of realized over the last couple of decades that just simply taking what they want from Native American culture unapologetically, just using the cool stuff that they like and the way that it looks, without sort of giving any further thought to how that's received, that's sort of falling out of favor. I think probably for good. But earlier in the Shadowrun editions 1, 2, 3, there was a big split between shamanic magic and hermetic magic. But in fourth edition and fifth edition, that sort of got flattened out. So there's not really much mechanical difference at all between the different styles of magic, other than what attributes you use to resist the backlash when you use magic. So if you're a hermetic, you might use logic instead of charisma, but that's really mostly a cosmetic difference. Shamans tend to be a certain thing, right? Role playing wise, just have a different feel for it. but mechanically there's not a whole lot of difference, which, as you may or may not imagine, certain fans have opinions on both sides.
Really? Fans have different opinions on something?
Right. But I should say, that Magic in Shadowrun avoids a lot of the magic problems of some other games. Like in that in other games you have things like wish, right? Where you just get what you want. Shadowrun sort of avoids that by making magic very down to earth. But
Mhm.
having said that, down the line, you absolutely can break the world using Shadowrun magic the same as you can in any other game.
It's a game, and so if you look hard enough, there's gonna be ways to break it.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a game that system-wise is maybe not the most user-friendly, but is doable. Doesn't
Yeah.
require a ton of math, which I know for some people is a real big put off. So I guess then, and you alluded to this, but this world clearly is very developed and has a lot of history going back. As I joked about it, but I do know enough to know that in the official Shadowrun canon, the old Earth Dawn game is actually set in the same universe, just a long time ahead. But in any case, being as this is your specialty, I'm going to stop babbling and let you kind of take off on this because I don't know nearly what you do.
So yes, the Shadowrun lore is absolutely incredible. It is a fantastic world to play in. But essentially, what you have is the basis for the system, and as you alluded to, Earth Dawn, an RPG, is basically set in the fourth world to Shadowrun's sixth world. And the idea behind the different worlds is that magic sort of ebbs and flows in and out of our universe. So during high tides of magic, you will have these races sort of reappear, and you'll have magic reappear. And then when magic goes away, the magic as the magic retreats, you'll have people not be able to do magic anymore, and these orcs and elves and dwarfs and trolls will sort of hide themselves again, at least biologically, as humans. So that's the basis. And then tying that together with the infamous Mayan calendar, right, which said that the world was going to end in 2012. That was when the magic returned to the world in Shadowrun. So the world did end, right, the fifth world, and now we're in the sixth world. And so magic returned. All of the different religions and the different sort of magic ideas in the world all turned out to be true all at once. And elves and orcs and dwarfs and trolls returned to the world, and it caused a tremendous amount of upheaval. And one of the great things that Shadowrun did is filled in a lot of really, really neat stuff between 2012 and 2050 when the initial role playing game was set. And then ever since then, I think the meta game, the meta narrative, the meta plot stuff has just been really, really fun, really, really engaging. And you have all these corporations, for example, have replaced nations as the most important arbiters of power. So you've got the big 10 megacorporate conglomerates that basically run everything on the planet. You've got another sort of subplot where as the magic increases in the world, these alien demons from another plane of existence find it easier to cross over into our world. And so there's always that threat of sort of chthonic horror that's just like sort of always in the background. And then I think when Shadowrun is at its best, instead of you just getting a team together to go be mercenaries, you have an idea of being punk, right? You have an idea of fighting back against these impersonal, faceless forces that are forcing you to act as drones and do what they want. And the punk aspect of the cyberpunk is basically you saying, no, I'm not going to do what you tell me. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to fight you all the way down.
That's fair. Yeah, that's the one thing that I always find intriguing with anything with the being tagged as cyberpunk or anything punk is the I don't even know what the right word is, but the difference in take on what that means, because I mean, just to say cyberpunk, I mean, in my mind, that's a lot of what that means to me is more of a RoboCop 2, flickering fluorescence and so on, where some people see it as much more of a can't think of a good movie reference wise, but much more of a glitzy sci-fi with a gritty element to it, I guess. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I definitely have very strong feelings about cyberpunk as a genre, and my personal thought is I'm not going to tell somebody what's cyberpunk and what's not, but I will say that there is a sort of brand of cyberpunk that is just about like grim and gritty future stuff and sort of transhumanism, and it's more about style over substance, and that is not my favorite part of
mhm.
cyberpunk. My favorite part of cyberpunk is the looming realization of what dangers lie ahead of us if we keep going the direction we're going, leading to mega corporate takeovers, leading to the continued monetization of people's bodies, the replacement of parts, not because you want to do that, but because it will make you more efficient, right? It's basically turning people into machines because that is how the society devalues them. That's how society treats people, is as machines. So I like that side which says no, we're not going to do that. We're going to rebel against that, and we're going to sort of work to take down that monstrosity, right, that devalues people. But again, I like the aesthetic, but I think the cyberpunk aesthetic that just sees the sort of neon late 80s futurism as the point of cyberpunk is not something that I particularly am interested in.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
If it's just that, I suppose I should say.
Yeah, well, I guess that's yeah. Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I feel a lot the same way. Like there is so much in the genre that it's well, to quote. Sorry to bring it, another game reference into this from a different brand, but Mike Pondsmith. That look, this game was written as a warning, not an objective.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And that's one thing I did want to ask because coming from a background of the R. Talsorian cyberpunk games, where the world itself is pretty bleak in a lot of ways, where yeah, you may be fighting to scratch out an existence for yourself and your crew. Is the meta narrative or whatever with Shadowrun, is there, so to speak, is it just struggling to have a nice dinner next week, or is there legitimate hope that you can affect meaningful change for more than your immediate circle, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I have strong feelings about that too. Not that every game has to have that, but I am more interested in games that will allow you to affect meaningful change. Unfortunately, I don't think Shadowrun, as it's designed in the broad strokes of the meta plot, Shadowrun doesn't really allow you to do that. It's sort of designed to be session by session, right? Around you getting a job from a Mr. Johnson or a fixer and doing the job. It doesn't sort of lead you in any direction beyond that, which ends up being sort of a D&D mentality where it's just I'm in it for the experience, I'm in it for the money, and just show me the next job. So any sort of meaningful change has to come from your GM and you wanting to do that, because it's just not baked in that you'll be able to affect the lore as it marches on.
Mhm.
I do have strong feelings about that because I think that does lead to a sort of grinding negativity about the world. But yeah, again, not every game has to has to be that, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, but I get what you're saying because it does, and I'd never thought about it specifically from the angle you just brought up, but to bring it back to the kind of metagaming perspective, if all you're doing is, so to speak, the next job to get more money and maybe a little bit better skill, and it's just wash, rinse, repeat, it does
Right.
become very much of the tunnel grinding that so many people have grown tired with classic dungeon crawling, Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever game it is.
Yep.
It's the same thing, but just with a different skin. And it is, to me, like you said, it's more fun if there's something beyond just that.
Right. I do appreciate it's one of the things I've been exploring, late. I think we're going to talk about that in a bit. But yeah, one of the things I've been exploring more lately is what could there possibly be as a goal for the characters beyond just getting more money, getting better stuff, getting stronger physically.
Yeah, well, to throw it in movies, like been thinking for whatever reason lately about a couple of different movies, specifically Four Brothers and the Nicolas Cage version of Gone in 60 Seconds. And like Four Brothers, okay, it's this, if you will, to use some of the language we were just using, it's very much kind of a punk story, right? Where
Sure.
we're fighting the corrupt cops and the bad guys and whatever. But in the end, well, one of them dies and the rest of them get to have Thanksgiving dinner and that's it.
Right.
Gone in 60 Seconds is a little bit more of a big picture story in a lot of ways, where you've got the narrative of, Nicolas Cage's character coming back to something he left to help out a family member, and it kind of glimpses at the end that maybe through this whole process that they've decided, hey, let's not be the, I don't want to say not be the punks, but that we can rise above somewhat.
Right. Yeah. There's a little bit more of a, if not honor among thieves, at least a sort of something more than just selfish action. Something
Yeah.
more than just being a mercenary, I suppose. The contrast is like the Matrix movie, right? You've got basic. I mean, it's an incredibly cyberpunk setting, but at the end of the first Matrix movie, you have Neo deciding like, I'm going to fix this, like I'm going to do something about this, and that's a sort of. I guess Shadowrun doesn't have heroes, is maybe the best way to say it. Right? You're all mercenaries, and you can rebel, but it's all a sort of personal rebellion, not necessarily a rebellion against everything.
No, that's actually, I think that's a very good way to put it, is that, well, you might be somewhat heroic. You're not big damn heroes for the setting.
Right. Yeah, and that's maybe the first and biggest difference people will notice between coming from Dungeon Dragons, for example, to Shadowrun, is that you're just not heroes. Your characters can absolutely die, and and if you see a dragon, don't think like, oh, good, here's my chance. Run the other direction.
Well, I've heard, and I actually saw this bumper sticker once, but I'm told it comes from Shadowrun, and the saying on the bumper sticker was, "Do not meddle in the affairs of dragons, for you are crunchy and good with ketchup."
Shadowrun has a similar one. It's shoot straight, conserve ammo, and never ever deal with a dragon.
Okay,
Sort of Shadowrun proper.
fair enough. Now, we've talked about a lot of editions here. Am I correct to understand that Shadowrun is currently on its 6th edition, which I believe came out, about a year and a half ago at Gen Con in 2019?
Yep, 2019. It's Shadowrun Sixth World Edition, which I think is just a play on the Sixth World from the lore. Yeah.
Okay.
So 2013 was 5th edition.
Also, as I understand it, the way they advance in world time is essentially that it is 60 years and 6 months from the time that any given book was published is when it's set in world time.
Yeah, I generally just say 61 years, but yeah, you're right. It's basically advances in the lore for every year it advances in real life. Add 61 to the year that we're in, and you've got the year in Shadowrun.
Okay.
Which means that it's been going on continuously from 2050, which started back in 1989, to now I think it's 2082 in Shadowrun.
Okay. I guess one thing I did want to ask you about, and maybe if things I've heard are correct, you might have even a little more insight on this. I've heard that there is a alternate system version of Shadowrun out there called Shadowrun Anarchy.
Yeah, actually, I have worked on all three of those books. Or I say all three of them. There's only 2 of them out. There's another Shadowrun Anarchy book coming out that's set in the 2050s. But yeah, Shadowrun Anarchy is we call it rules light or more narrative. But if you compare it to other rules light or narrative games, it's not it's not as rules light or narrative as the ones that are properly labeled that. But compared to Shadowrun, normal editions of Shadowrun, it is more rules light and more narrative, using plot points and things like that, and kind of keeping everything much more simple. But yeah, that came out. Man, when did that come out? 2000 and maybe 2017, maybe.
Now, does that interface with the regular Shadowrun stuff, like for you to be able to use? Because again, in my experience with most of these cyberpunk genre games, gear, etc., plays a huge part, and thus splat books are a real thing to anyone who's into that kind of gaming. Do the regular Shadowrun splat books in any way apply to Anarchy, or is a lot of that kind of abstracted for that application?
So you have a number of different kinds of splat books for Shadowruns because some of them are just purely lore. And those, or really any lore, no matter what the book from Shadowrun, can be used for Anarchy, right? Because Anarchy and normal Shadowrun take place in the same world, all the same stuff. We have things that happen, in metaplot wise in Shadowrun Anarchy that apply to the normal Shadowrun world. So all of it is the same world, but none of the mechanical bits of the main Shadowrun games or the main Shadowrun editions will apply to Anarchy and vice versa. So yeah, they're two completely separate mechanical things, but the same shared universe.
Fair enough. So I would assume then that Anarchy would be a bit more new gamer friendly then, probably.
It really depends, but yeah, in general, we have people who are coming from D&D who find Anarchy easier. People who've played more narrative games find Anarchy easier, and people who have been playing Shadowrun a long time and just are tired of the fiddly bits of Shadowrun, but love the world, find Anarchy to their liking as well. Now, it is not for everybody. I myself, I'm not necessarily somebody who gravitates first towards more narrative games and rules light games. I like them, but I like normal Shadowrun just fine as well. So I think traditionally your traditional gamers like the crunch of Shadowrun. The crunchy gamers like the crunchy part of Shadowrun. But yeah, if you're just looking for something to kind of grab and have fun with, Shadowrun Anarchy is a pretty easy way to get into the world.
That's fair. I guess part of where I was angling is I've heard this, I would level this criticism at Rifts, which I've mentioned, earlier in our conversation. I've also heard it leveled very much at the most recent edition of Warhammer Fantasy, the role playing game, is that the rules and so forth are involved enough that they, without coming right out and saying it, they kind of beg to be really almost your only game. They're the game that you focus on. And in my personal experience, games like that, as we as gamers move from being college students who we didn't have to do that sleep thing,
Right.
as we move into adulthood where we've got jobs and families and just so many other things that need more of our time, those games, while we love the settings and the worlds and but the mechanics, and if you're the type of person who wants to play more than one specific game, they just, to keep them from being very sloggy at the table, they can only be your only game, and so they just don't work if you want to play other stuff. Does that happen with normal Shadowrun, we'll say, or is it not quite that demanding?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. Now, I don't want to say that it has to be fiddly, and I don't want to say that, like, you have to devote so much time to it. But certainly, I'll say it this way: you can show up at a game, right? And if your GM knows the system backward and forward, then everybody else doesn't have to. But I'll also say that from a GM's perspective, that having players that don't know the system well makes GMing a lot more difficult and less fun. And the people that I've played with who aren't all in on Shadowrun hardly ever know the rules well. So
Mhm.
yes, I think exactly what you're saying is true. And Anarchy does fix that because it's a lot simpler.
I mean, I guess that was kind of the question I was looking to ask, was that for someone like, say, myself, where, yeah, I mean, the world sounds great, and I'd love, but I really don't want to spend 3 weeks reading the core book, and then I also end up, because in a lot of cases I'm the one who wants to play the less common game. So, well, okay, you want to play it, you're running it, so now I'm
Right.
absorbing, I mean, how many different systems, and like, yeah, if I've got to dedicate a ton of time to learn to it to be able to run it, it makes it less attractive option for me, I guess is the best way to put it. But it sounds like
Right.
Shadowrun Anarchy might be really fun, be able to get some people to play without going, okay, well, so you need to know this and this and this, and 10 minutes later, okay, yeah, so pick up those dice and roll to hit.
Yeah, I mean, for Anarchy, pretty much everything you need is on a character sheet, right? You don't need
Hmm.
to go back and reference other parts of the book very often. With Shadowrun, the normal editions, that's absolutely not the case. I'll give you an example. There's an archetype that I forgot to mention called a technomancer. And these are people that hackers that don't need to use cyberdecks. They can just use their mind, for whatever quirk of biology. And not only do you have a separate mini game for hacking, but then also technomancers have a completely separate set of vocabulary just for them, right? So what they do is called tasking, and they can summon little sprites, which are kind of like spirits, but they're called sprites, and you have to compile them, and you have different rules for what you can do. It's like it's all just sort of so much extra that, like, as a GM, frankly, I left off technomancers because I don't like technomancers. I don't want to have to learn all of that extra vocabulary and to keep it in my mind, just to play a game where it might come up, once every other set. So yeah, Anarchy flattens that out and just says, hey, this is what you can do. It's right here on your character sheet. That way your GM doesn't have to keep everything in their mind.
No, that sounds pretty fair. So I guess sounds like we've kind of gone through and done a pretty good overview of this. Is there anything more, you knowing the game and the world? Is there anything more you think we need to add on to this to give people a good overview of what Shadowrun is, and if you want to play this kind of thing, this is a game you want to look at?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a new RPG, you're not going to be blown away by Shadowrun's elegant system. But if you are looking for a world to inhabit, there's an old Super Nintendo game called Shadowrun. There's a Sega Genesis game called Shadowrun, and more recently, there's been a number of computer games by Harebrained Schemes: Shadowrun Returns, Shadowrun Dragonfall, and Shadowrun Hong Kong. And just playing those will give you an incredible sense of just how captivating this world is and how much effort and care has been put into creating a world that is just so engaging with all sorts of things that you've come to love from all sorts of different RPGs. So I can't say enough about how cool the world is and how many cool stories have been told in it. So if you're looking for something like that, and you absolutely are looking for an RPG that has a fully developed world that you can almost do anything in, then Shadowrun is absolutely worth checking out.
Excellent, excellent. So I guess that kind of wraps that part of it up. And do know through various things, I had been made aware of you through your podcasting, which you mentioned, and perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about that. But I also, through us being introduced, found out that you were also behind a marketing campaign that I saw a lot of on Twitter. Oh, probably about 6 months ago. So if you would like to kind of expand on where people can find more of you and your other work, or what all you're involved in, if you would like to talk about that for a bit, be more than happy to listen.
Absolutely. We have, I guess the thing that I'm most well known for is doing a podcast called the Neo-Anarchist podcast. And that is an in character Shadowrun lore podcast where you turn on the first episode and it'll give you the first moment that the Shadowrun universe diverged from our own. And then it goes year by year and kind of tells you everything that's happening. And everything that happened in the Shadowrun universe. So that's pretty excellent. People tend to like that. So I would encourage you, if you are interested in the world of Shadowrun and you don't really want to play video games, then you could listen to that and it'll fill you in on everything that you might need to know to get into the world. We also have a Shadowrun actual play podcast called Shadowrun Origins, where we are running games set in the 2050s during the first edition of Shadowrun. So there's some iconic runs and iconic NPCs that we interact with back then, and that's a lot of great fun. But yeah, you said 6 months ago you saw what we were doing all over the place, and that's because we started our own gaming company called Fragging Unicorns Games, and we launched our Kickstarter, very successful Kickstarter, which I'm grateful for our first game called Gangs of the Undercity, which it's a cyberpunk fantasy miniatures game that is set in, not in Shadowrun, but in a world similar to Shadowrun called Neo Babylon. And yeah, that went really well, and it should be fulfilling within the next month or so. So we're super excited to have that first offering, and we've got some other cool stuff on the horizon. An RPG called Subversion is our next project after we're able to fulfill Gangs of the Undercity.
Oh, wow. Now, I have to be completely honest. Here would be Mr. Johnson joining us. Apparently, his contacts didn't inform him of things properly.
Technomancers. We blame everything on technomancers.
Yes, my feed has been edited by technomancers, so I'm not quite sure how that happened.
We were just plugging our stuff. So give the plug for all of the cool stuff that you do, Shadowrun related.
Yes.
Yeah, well, there's the Arcology podcast, which started about 5 years ago with my wife, who goes by the nom de plume Vox, or CZ Wright, as she'll be found in the credits of many a Shadowrun published publication. But yeah, the Arcology podcast has been a podcast sort of about Shadowrun, but also an actual play to go with it. So we have episodes where we talk about the game and the setting, the game mechanics, books as they come out in some cases, not all of them. And then we have, I think we can lay claim to having the longest running Shadowrun actual play in podcasting as far
Mhm.
as campaigns goes. It's been going for a long time.
I was going to say, I actually have listened to some of your podcasts, probably very early parts of the feed, where I want to say, did you start by kind of started going over the basics of 5th edition, maybe?
Yeah, we started the podcast not long after 5th edition came out.
Yeah, I did listen to a bit of your work then, right up until I believe the first episode or two of the actual plays you started releasing. And then I don't even know what happened to my attention span. And I think it kind of became one of those things where I realized with the group of people I was currently playing games with that I was never going to convince them to run Shadowrun. And so, like, well, as much as I was enjoying it, maybe I could find something that I could convince them to run.
Yeah, I think I've often been the person among the gaming group that's been, hey, let's try out this thing or that thing, and most people just kind of wanted to put their feet down and just keep playing whatever it is they already know. That's a strong tide to fight against.
Oh, it is.
I'm not sure what the answer is really. I think it's just to play things with people and have fun and see what you can sneak in when you can. And also maybe find some other people who are willing to try more things.
Yeah. Well, and I think, if nothing else, maybe, a silver lining in this whole COVID situation is that because people are forced to move online, it is easier to find some people that are willing to do something outside of what you normally do.
I think so, but anecdotally, I've also heard of a lot of people who have just not gotten back together to game and are waiting for this to be over because a large number of their gaming group just won't play online. Maybe they've tried it and they didn't like it, or maybe they're just refuse to even try it. So I feel a little bit stymied by that sort of thing when I see it, because I've just had such a great experience playing games online with people. I've been doing it for years now, not because of isolation, but because the people that I play with are scattered around the country, or in some cases other countries.
I haven't played a ton online, but I've also been kind of fortunate in that where I'm at, the restrictions and the general situation hasn't been too bad. But even that, we took a good 8 or 9 months where we didn't meet. But yeah, online it's a different feel than sitting around a table, and it does require a little bit of acclimation, if nothing else.
Yeah, you're right. It is a different experience, and yeah, apparently not for everybody. Though I do urge everyone to at least try it out and give it a fair shot, because it's a great way to connect with people that you might not otherwise have the ability to connect with for lots of reasons, even not during a pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. And I know some people through other podcasts, whatever, that they play a lot of much lesser known indie titles and whatnot, and or because of where they live geographically, it's not feasible to play in person or find games in the specific game you want to play. And so the internet has been something, like you said, that they've just done because that's how they did it.
That is absolutely one of the major pros of the internet, is being able to connect with other people who share interests. I think that that's clearly a significant benefit that I certainly didn't have access to in my youth, though I tried to, and I sort of got into Shadowrun and met my first gaming group that introduced me to Shadowrun through a dial-up bulletin board system that was local to my small town that I lived near.
So I remember the old bulletin board message servers. back when I was in college. Spent a lot of time on some of those. But in any case, unfortunately, due to technomancer issues, or you
I will blame myself. I'm a flake. Yes, sorry.
hey, no offense taken. Trust
I scrolled past the thing. It's absolutely my calendar gremlins kicking in. So I'm afraid I can't put this one on technomancers.
me. We can at least blame the pandemic, because even if you had a reasonable handle on time before said pandemic, the effects of the pandemic have made everyone not be able to remember what day, time, etc. it is. But now, Opti and I he was just starting to tell us about gangs of the Undercity and so forth, which, as I understand it, you're involved with as well.
Yes, not quite as deeply as Opti and some of the other people on his team, but I've gotten a chance to play test it at quite a few phases of its development, and I did most, if not all, of the editing in the rulebook.
Aha.
We did have somebody else do some. I don't know. Editing is a weird thing, right? Like there's three different kinds of editing. But yes, you did an awful lot of the
It was a
finding
lot.
error kind. Yeah.
Finding the errors, punctuation, making all the things that were supposed to be capitalized consistent, and figure out how that was going to be along the way. Yes, it was
I
a
want to. I want to. We had another guy who did a lot of it too, who goes by the hand of Orion on our Discord. But also did a lot of. I don't want to discount his, but before he came on, Cliff had fixed most of the issues.
yeah. My editing was less about making the rules make sense together, though I think I raised a fair amount of questions as I read through things. It was more having to do with the technical side of the editing, I'm afraid. So yeah, I haven't been super involved in the development of Gangs of the Undercity. I've been I think one of the major cheerleaders mostly, and I've just
Mhm.
sort of stepped in to fill the gaps in some places where some help was needed.
Cliff was one of the first playtesters, but also I think what Cliff deserves credit for moving forward is that he is one of our core developers for the Subversion RPG that we're hopefully going to be talking a lot more about this coming year. So
Is there, I mean, look, I think minis are really cool and they look pretty, but I am one of those people who is gifted with hands that are like not conducive to painting tiny things.
it's not for everybody.
Hey, it's one of those things I keep wanting to try, and I may soon do it, but I can cover up a standard 28 millimeter miniature with my thumb.
Well, there are a lot of shortcuts that can make a miniature look pretty good without necessarily having to have a super steady hand. So you can get a long way with just base coats, a wash, and a highlight over brushing, and that can look really nice.
I'm sure somebody on your podcasting network would love to be able to walk you through mini stuff.
Yes, well, yeah, to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, through various circumstances, I did hook you guys up with Sugi from another podcast on our network called Squad Tactica, that they specialize in minis and skirmish games. And
Yeah, we had a great interview with him yesterday.
oh, you did that yesterday? Okay. He's a really nice guy. I did a little sit down with him right before I put you guys in contact, and yeah, he's a really
Yeah, it was
nice
super
guy.
nice, very friendly. Yeah, very friendly, enthusiastic. Asked a lot of great questions.
But if you're saying that you'd rather talk about our upcoming RPG, if that's where you're at with that, I'm all on board to do that as well.
Well, I would be more than happy, because, well, I think the stuff that I've seen of Gangs of the Undercity looks amazing to me. They're pretty little toys, and I don't even know the questions to ask you about a miniatures game. So I'm all down to go talk some RPGs, because
Ask
that's
us
my
all the
bag of
questions
tricks.
about RPGs instead. Yeah, that's fine.
So can you give me, just obviously, like you said, you're, I don't want to say very early stages, but you're still in the early stages with this. Can you give, and I don't obviously want to ask you anything that you want to hold back for whatever reason.
Generally speaking, we're informational anarchists, so we think information wants to be free. So
Okay.
we try not to hold anything back.
So are you saying that you like make an NDA for yourself, sign it, and then intentionally break it?
Either that or we just don't do NDAs.
Okay.
We used to have NDAs, and then we were like, you know what? Why are we doing this? Like, if somebody wants to say that, hey, listen to what Fragging Unicorn is doing. Like, can you believe that? Like, I don't think that hurts us at all. I think that can only help us. So we believe in what we're doing. So if somebody wants to, chat about it online, like, hey, go nuts. We don't care. But yeah, I would love to talk about it.
All right. Well, then I guess start from the wherever you feel the need to start, an elevator pitch, or have at it.
Sure. So it is a RPG set in the same universe as Gangs of the Undercity. So it is also cyberpunk fantasy, and our only excuse for that is, we write what we love, we write what we know. So we've all spent a lot of our time doing Shadowrun, and for a variety of reasons, we thought, there's a number of different D&D type things out there, high fantasy things out there. There's a number of things out there for space RPGs. There's a number of urban fantasy. You know what there's not a lot of? Cyberpunk fantasy. So we felt like there's room for at least one more, and we could tell some fun stories. So we set it in the same universe as Gangs of the Undercity, but instead of, like Shadowrun, instead of the magic coming and going in ebbs and flows, in our world, magic has always been around, right? So it's basically an accelerated fantasy setting instead of, a setting that sort of takes off from our world and just adds magic. And what that ends up being is that you have a bunch of people with ties to the old Babylonian Empire, and they have set up a new Babylonian empire called Neo-Babylon. And for good or ill, it has become a cyberpunk fantasy dystopia. That's the overview. But as far as what you're going to be doing, you're going to play the part of an envoy. And an envoy is somebody who represents a community. And that's one of the innovations, right? So the world itself is one innovation, but also the gameplay, sort of like what we were talking about earlier, in that if you play certain dystopian games, the setting doesn't handle you overthrowing the dystopia very well. We wanted to intentionally make a game where you could make a difference. And so starting at the community level, right, whatever that looks like, if it's just, a handful of people on a ship, or if it's your neighborhood, or maybe it's your small business, or whatever you want to do, you will have envoys who go out and try to change things, change the world on behalf of your community. And the way that you do that is by sticking close to your goals and your values and the values of your community. And that's how you kind of move forward in the world instead of gaining experience points or gaining money.
Okay.
I think that's as overview as I can make it. But when I take all the things that we love about cyberpunk and fantasy games and make those the focus.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that sets it apart, I think, from the general cyberpunk mood is that yes, the dystopia is there, but the focus of the game is trying to make things better in measurable ways.
Mm-hmm.
That's might not be what everyone's doing. You might, if you're just trying to play a group of people who want to make a bunch of money and be mercs, you can play it that way. But the way we're looking at setting it up is to focus more on how what your character does affects them and the people around them in ways that can be both desired and undesired, or good and bad, and how you approach those consequences either alone or as a team. The community based rules are going to be very central to campaign play.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. I guess as Opti and I were talking about before, even with Shadowrun, it can get almost grindy in that it's mission, rinse, repeat, because we need more new yen, we need more gear, whatever. It sounds like what you guys are going for here is really, it's more a story about affecting change on some level as opposed to the adventures or misadventures of Team XYZ.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
as someone who really, really loves Shadowrun and has played a lot of it over the years, one of the things as a player that I have found somewhat frustrating is that it doesn't really feel like you can really change things or matter to the world beyond maybe your small circle of contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we had talked about before you got on. Was like exactly that. Yeah.
So this game is really going to be focused more on the community aspects of it and helping lift your community against the corporate overlords and so forth in a way that has some impact aside from just, for lack of a better way to say it, burning down the neighborhood AT&T store to protest cell phone towers or something.
Sure, you might do that, but but also the game is called Subversion because the whole point of it is to act in subversive ways to the people that are bringing your community down, or standing in the way of them. So trying to match your personal goals and your personal values up against the goals and the values of the community that is dear to you is going to be the central struggle of the game.
Okay, that actually sounds, in a lot of ways, almost something new. Most games, and like I'll be one to say I'm a big fan of. I don't know if either two of you are familiar with it, of Delta Green, the kind of Call of Cthulhu offshoot. But that is very much a thing where, for lack of a better word, you're just trying to plug the dike another time, much in the same way that you're saying Shadowrun kind of feels a lot of the time. And this sounds like, to use that kind of eldritch analogy, that you're not just plugging the dike, you're patching the rift.
Yes, part of my issue with a lot of different media, even heroic media, is that at the end of the day, the best you can hope for is to keep status quo, right? So, like, the problem with Batman and the Joker is that the Joker is out there to mix up status quo no matter what it is, right? Like, even if Poison Ivy is right, for example, about the dangers of hurting the environment, Batman goes in there and says, "Well, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to deal with Poison Ivy upsetting the status quo." Right. So at the end of the day, the comic has to be reset back to status quo. In Shadowrun, you can't overthrow a Big Ten corporation because that will upset status quo. And that to us sounds awful, right? If there's something wrong with the world, if there's something wrong with the status quo of the world, then fix the status quo, change it. Right. That's the whole idea that we're going for.
Yeah, though I will say, from the perspective of, say, Delta Green, like on the outside, that is a game about cosmic horror. So I don't have any problem with going into that. I mean, that's kind of what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
No, it is.
Right, and that's I'm not criticizing any game for saying this is the status quo of the universe and this is what you're choosing to play. I'm saying I don't want to make that game again. Right? I want to make a different game.
No, and I think that's awesome, because that's, in some ways, a lot of games that are out there even now are all, I mean, they may be fantastically different reskins of the same core concept, but they're still, in a lot of ways, they're reskins. Even if they're using completely different mechanics and a completely different base story, it's still the exact same struggle, just told a little differently.
Yeah, we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago where whatever you make mechanics for is what people are going to focus on. And if you want people to play a certain game but you don't have any mechanics for it, then players are going to by and large ignore that part of the game. So we made a point to say that what you do, like what your stated values are, what your stated goals are, if you don't try to achieve them, if you don't try to stand by them, there's a mechanical, I won't say penalty, but there's a mechanical effect that happens when you choose to either go with your goals and values, or go with the goals and the values of your community, or go against those, right? It mechanically matters. And yeah, you're right. That's something I don't see very often in RPG.
Yeah, I like the idea you're coming from.
Yeah, I found some interesting and inspiring game mechanics concepts among some OSR products, particularly Morkborg. Most recently, I just found that system very intriguing and interesting.
I haven't read it yet, but the artwork in that game and the design choices are amazing.
Yeah, that book is
Yeah.
something else.
To be honest, I don't think I really want to play a character in the completely doomed and depressing setting of Morkborg, but as a gamer and a game designer, I found it a very inspiring product to read. Inspiring enough that I'm working on my own hack and slash of Morkborg. They have a nice third party open gaming license arrangement. So yeah, I'm working on my own sort of OSR sci-fi horror game. Well, not so much horror as in, kicking demons' asses and taking names kind of game.
Yeah, I don't like Morkborg, but I am so damn impressed by it.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the thing, is it's one of those games where, whether or not you want to play it, it's inspiring to.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like, well done, you guys. Like, just absolutely made the game they wanted to make. like 100,000%. Just absolutely standing ovation for execution.
Well, that's I heard an interview with the two individuals behind that, and I can't remember their names right now, but the main two guys, and they said, yeah, they completely just went, well, let's make the game that we want to play, and we'll try this Kickstarter thing, and then, oh, holy crap! Apparently, some other people
Yeah,
want to play this game too.
yeah. Yeah, that's how we found with Gangs of the Undercity, where, like, let's just do this thing we wanna do. Oh, I guess some other people want it too. That's ex
Also, I think it's good and helpful that they opened up the gates, so to speak, to other people to design things using their system and ideas. I really love the open gaming license, and I really wish absolutely every role playing game producer publisher would just do that.
I'm seeing it more and more. Off the top of my head, I know most of the big ones now do it. I know Chaosium just released one for the BRP engine.
Oh, that's fantastic news. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I heard that a couple weeks ago. Free League has one out for the Mutineer Zero. Savage Worlds, the new Cortex. Although Cortexes, I don't know if theirs is officially out yet, but it is officially in the works. They're going to do a program similar to the DM's Guild or the Genesis Foundry that FFG/Edge does. I don't know the names for all of them, but yeah, the OGL thing is really becoming, like, I think a lot more publishers are realizing that it gets people to buy their books in addition to all this other stuff.
That, and it creates a more open, creative environment that allows for more ideas to flourish.
Mhm.
I think you're always better off viewing the people that you would see as competitors instead as peers. People with which you have plenty of room to collaborate and coexist within, rather than viewing it as the whole industry as this zero sum game of scarcity, which I think for the most part, reality has shown that it is not. That there are plenty of people out there willing to play all kinds of different games, no matter how weird or obscure they might seem.
I think you're completely right. And you were talking about Mork work. I've heard hints, and maybe this is even something that you're working on, and I just heard about it from a different channel, but I heard hints that there is a quote unquote cyborg hack in the works.
That's clever.
I saw like a bit of cover art or something somewhere, but through my various internet lurking and so forth, I saw that somewhere. And yeah, I mean, I'm aware of some projects that I'm really, really curious to see, but I don't want to out people's projects without them saying it's okay, so to speak.
Sure.
Are you hedging around something that I was talking about, or are you talking about something else?
I was talking about something else, but if we're done discussing subversion, and by the way, I'm really curious to find out more about this. So maybe when it gets a little closer to being a releasable product or something, maybe we can get you to come back on and sit and have a chat about that. But
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, I don't mean to steal any subversion thunder here. Just we started getting down the third party OGL route. It sounded like you were goading me into talking about the thing that I said I was also some other side project of mine that is my Morkborg hack.
no, no. By all means, as long as we've covered subversion sufficiently for now, I did want to give you some time to talk about. You had mentioned it briefly in our conversations leading up to this that you have a project in the works as well. I'd love to hear more about that as also.
Well, I have to actually get going, so I will leave you with Cliff and say I really appreciate you having me on the show, Steve.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Chad. And like I said, we'll see if we can't maybe get you on again at some point when Subversion is a little closer to being a public product. And that one other thing that we talked about off the air, definitely be interested in that as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. Stay safe. So it's now the two of us. But yeah, you had mentioned in our talks leading up to trying to set everything up that you had a project you were working on as well. I'd love to hear some about that.
Sure, yeah, it's an OSR style sci-fi, I guess horror dungeon crawler, sort of a rules light, but also a bit of crunch to it. and it's inspired by essentially like classic first-person shooters like Doom. Your characters are expendable soldiers sent into sort of a sci-fi facilities like on Mars or a space station or something to go clear out the demons and zombies or pull off different objectives. And yeah, it's a hack and slash of Morkborg. I'm using the Morkborg system. It was inspired by that as well, though it's also fairly heavily adapted, and it's a completely different genre of heavy metal. It's the flavor that I'm going for with the gameplay is that you should feel like you're going into a soulless meat grinder. You're an expendable soldier who's just going to get horribly killed in some deep, dark sci-fi hole in the universe. But in reality, what the game is actually doing is letting you be a bunch of demon killing badasses.
Fair enough. So more of a British grindcore as opposed to Nordic death metal.
Yeah, I suppose so. Another aspect to it is that I'm taking inspiration from some recent computer games that I've played, and pulling in a concept that is, I guess, could be described as roguelite. So in a roguelite computer game, you're expected to die fairly frequently, but when you do, you get to pick certain things that you get to improve your character with for your next run, often based on what you accomplished previously. So in this game, when your character dies, based on how many different objectives you've achieved and bosses you've killed and that sort of thing, you get to choose additional add-ons for your next character to sort of tailor them into being in a better starting position than you were with your first character. So it's not quite like starting over, and there's some continuity, even though your previous character probably died horribly and you're just sending another one into the meat grinder.
It sounds in a way then almost like it's kind of an RPG with a kind of an intentionally encouraging a certain element of metagaming.
Yes, I suppose, and it's also designed to be GM-less. So
Ha.
there's a few tables you can roll on to resolve certain things, but the rules are simple enough to where the enemies act fairly predictably, and there's a certain amount of random, I guess you can call it dungeon generation, that determines objectives and the layout of things and the way the map works and movement. It's all fairly efficient, and well, my friend Carlton, who creates the dice bot Exploding Dice, has actually worked on an adaptation for it that will handle all the room and enemy randomness for you, so you don't have to flip back to a couple of tables and roll dice when you move into a room. So I'm really excited to see how that goes as he's developing it. It's really neat. He's been able to hide things behind spoiler tags within Discord, so the text is blacked out until you click on it to find out what the surprise is. The loot tables are all built into it, and it's gonna be real fun. We've play tested a couple times with it, and the plans that he's got for Discord bot integration as essentially like a GM assistant type thing for a GM-less game is pretty innovative.
I say it sounds really cool. And I like kind of the idea that you're setting it up, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it does sound like to a certain point, it's not a game intended for campaign play. It's more of a, oh, hey, two of the five people we normally play with didn't show up today, so let's play this. Or, it's a quick pickup game, not maybe as involved, or am I reading what you're saying wrong?
It's not a full involved everything in life is covered role playing game. You're there to do one thing, and that's to get through missions that probably involve fighting and or sneaking past demons in a sci-fi environment. Yeah, so it's not going to give you the full range of experiences you might have with any full-size RPG. But it is designed with some rules for campaign play, where you can continue your character from one mission to another and have advancements, and it does encourage some replayability. One of the things to move towards is unlocking a specialization in one of the MOSs, which is what I call the character classes. That gives you better options when you make a new character with that MOS. But yeah, it's definitely meant to be sort of a jump in and play it. It takes 5 minutes or less to make a character, probably the first time, even less afterwards. Well, more when you have your advancements to spend in between, I suppose. But even then, maybe not more than 10 minutes. And the actual missions, if you kind of already know the rules and you're not learning them as you go, each mission involving several different sections of dungeons shouldn't take you more than an hour or two at the most.
No, that sounds really, really cool. And I really like the games that are starting to come out now, designed kind of along this quick, get them down on the table and let's get playing, as opposed to, and I covered this some before you were able to join us, but my background in gaming was actually the very first game I ever played was West End game Star Wars, but then the game that really hooked me on RPGs was Rifts.
Okay.
You aren't setting Rifts down on the table and starting playing with anyone in less than an hour and a half, and that's if they all know the game already.
No, but it does have some lovely tables.
Yes, it does. And some of them have provided some incredible memories.
There's definitely some things that happen from memorable dice rolls in role playing games. It's one of the things that brings you back. You just don't know what's going to happen with every session.
Yeah, no, that's the thing I love about role playing games too. Is that there are so many things that just happen because of a weird roll of the dice or someone's reaction to someone else that you just can't get that experience from a computer game. Yeah, as I was saying though, I really like the concept that you're going for with this game, and that it's something designed to be lightweight, fun, easy to set up, but still with a process of being more than just a shoot 'em up.
Yeah, I was a little bit worried with this on paper that it would just be, hey, move into a room, fight the bad guys, loot the stuff, then move to the next room and fight the bad guys and do the stuff. But in playtesting, I've found that we were able to do multiple different approaches to victory. And there's a lot of sneaking around and thinking about things tactically and sort of planning out, all right, how are we going to pull off this objective? We know there's a bunch of demons in that room that we don't really have the bullets to deal with right now. And it was really tense.
We already have Dungeons and Dragons for that other thing.
Yeah, it felt like it scratched the dungeon crawl itch for me too, without getting into the minutia of like, all right, I'm moving into this 5-foot square and poking it with a pole to see if there's a trap there, and it's a lot more fast and loose than that rule wise. But I think with enough crunch that it still satisfies that feeling like, well, I'm not just making things up as I go along and narrating my way through the dungeon without the risk. It still felt like at any time our characters could be crushed horribly, and yet we survived the mission.
Even better, right? Now, is this going to be coming out as part of Fragging Unicorns, or is this something you're just going to do independently?
I haven't had that conversation with Opti about that, but I think I'll probably do this just on my own. Just post it on itch.io and just see where that goes. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to go with it though, because I'm going to be working with Carlton to do some sort of bot integration with it. Yeah, I don't know if this is just going to be a little thing that I'll finish and just toss out and see what happens with it, or if it starts to gain some traction and people start playing it and using the Discord bot, we roll with it more and create some more things for it down the road. Maybe a Kickstarter will happen, and maybe not. I'm not that far in that side of the process. And to be honest, like all of those questions are the least fun for me. I like coming up with the game design and trying to make it work and playing it with people.
Oh, I get that completely. I've dabbled with different things here and there, and like you said, it's like the fun part is building it and doing it, and then, well, oh yeah, how do I get it to other people?
Right. I'm still at the point where like every time I play test it, I get some really good ideas to make it better. And I want to get to the point where I play test it maybe 2 or 3 times in a row with only a few little ideas coming up. And then I think maybe it'll be about done baking roughly for the first edition.
Well, that seems fair.
For now, though, yeah, I've got a Discord server where I invite people who are interested in checking it out and playtesting. I've got a pinned post with the recent version of the document on there. The dice roller's got the dungeon generator built into it, and it's all ready to go. So if you're interested, I can invite you in there. And if anyone who hears this is interested, just reach out to me somehow, and I'm willing to pull you in. I'm not doing like a general here's a post out on the internet to join it yet. It's more of a individual invite sort of thing at this point. It will be finished and put out to the general public in some form.
No, okay, no, that sounds cool. Yeah, I'll definitely come check it out.
Yeah, and if you just want to wait for the finished product and don't want the early access experience, I think first quarter 2021 is a reasonable expectation of something.
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, hey, like I said, I'll gladly come take a look. I can't guarantee you how much time I have free to dedicate to anything. So, in any case, as you were alluding to there, where can people find you if they're interested in be it your podcast or any of your other stuff? Is there websites?
Sure. I'll start with go to YouTube and search up Shadowcasters Network. That's a YouTube channel of the network that I'm a part of. We do a weekly show where we discuss a lot of things about tabletop, different game design topics, culture related things, news items. It's sort of a tabletop variety talk show, and it's a lot of fun. Opti's on there as well, also joined by Bobby Frankenberger and Oz, who started joining the Anarchy. We always have great conversations. We snip them up into videos that we put out on YouTube, and we're in the process of making an audio podcast, but it's a lot of fun to catch the show live if you can make it. And that channel is also where I do a variety of other actual plays. I currently have one that's a Mech Warrior Destiny every Tuesday night. So as of the recording, I have one planned for this evening. It will be episode 5 out of, we're probably going to do 8 of them as a limited run season. And any money raised with the super chats there, we're donating to World Builders, and also just using it to raise awareness of the charity World Builders. So I'll throw out a plug for that, worldbuilders.org. Check that out. Donate money to them if you find it compelling, which I do.
Excellent.
And other than that, the Arcology podcast is sort of my main flagship podcast. It's all about Shadowrun, long-running actual play campaigns. We talk about 5th edition, the new 6th World edition, Anarchy, which is probably my favorite edition. I also have a long-running actual play that's Earth Dawn called Legends of Earth Dawn, where we have a great cast there, including Opti. We get along and do a lot of things together. But also on that show as one of the players is Josh Harrison, who's the line developer of the game Earth Dawn, he's been a real joy to play with. So Legends of Earth Dawn.
I actually have heard of Earth Dawn.
Yeah, it's the fantasy setting that took place in the ages before Shadowrun.
Yeah, we did cover that a little bit. I was aware, and I believe, telling Opti before, I believe I did make an Earth Dawn character at one point in about 1996, but I never got to play it.
Yeah, it was for a long time one of those white whale games for me. Like I could never get a campaign running that would stick, or get people to play it with me or run it for me for more than a session or two here and there. And I essentially bumped into Josh Harrison at Gen Con a couple of years in a row. And I guess he's really nice, and we got along chatting a couple times, and I was sort of there as a podcaster and just threw out, hey, would you like to do an Earth Dawn actual play with me? And he did. And so I get to play Earth Dawn at least once a month now.
That's cool, though. That's cool, because we're actually talking about expanding into some actual plays here in the near future. But it's like anything else, it's time and scheduling, and everything else just makes everything.
I hear you. Yeah. The scheduling is the hardest part.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, otherwise, I'm in Shadowrun Origins. That's a Shadowrun actual play that Opti does as part of the Neo-Anarchist podcast. That's been a fun campaign. We're playing through all the classic early runs of the Shadowrun era, the old published ones like Harlequin, and now all the names are escaping my brain. Bottled Demon, quite a few other just early like 1st and 2nd edition runs at this point in the 2050s era.
I would say the only Shadowrun adventure name that I know, and I only know this because I heard Daryl Mott mention it once, is Food Fight, but I don't even know exactly what it refers to.
Food Fight is like the classic. Let's demo the game and learn the basic mechanics. So the setting is that you're in a stuffer shack, like a convenience store, basically, where a bunch of gangers show up and start harassing somebody, and there's a shootout. And there's extra tables for like what kinds of strange products you explode when you miss. Things like fizzy pink meat products or neon green krill chips or something.
Oh my gosh.
It's memorable because of the wackiness that happens in that. But it's essentially just a straight up, you fight some goons in a convenience store and get to see how the rules work before you start getting into a real run. There's a little bit more of a setup and story to it that you could draw on with, but that's really what it's all about.
You know what? I've said this various places before. Shadowrun is a game that I would very, very happily sit down and play and have a blast with. I don't know if at this point I personally have the time needed to learn to run it, unfortunately, at least not in its regular version. It sounds like Anarchy might be something I could get a hold of and get to, but because, I'm an adult now, not a college student or whatever, that picking up full-blown Shadowrun and learning it as much as I would have fun with it, because I have so many other interests, just isn't practical for me. Not, and I don't mean that to say in any way that it's not a wonderful game.
Honestly, I think that's part of why the Arcology podcast gained so much of its initial popularity, is because we sort of talk about how, sort of help present how to go about approaching this very rules crunchy game, but also it's gaming in a style that is so different than most others. You're not you don't usually have the straightforward, hey, I do this and go fight that bad guy and get the treasure and save the day. There's double crosses and political machinations in the background, and various complex layers of reality that that the characters are interacting and working with. The physical space, the matrix, astral space, dealing with the spirits and car chases and things. It can be a lot to approach, and the only reason I do it so, I don't want to say easily, because it's never quite exactly easy, but I guess the only reason I find it quite so accessible is because I've just been immersing myself in it for years.
Well,
So yeah, I get that.
exactly. That's kind of exactly what I was saying. It's not that I don't want to. It's just simply that if you've got the background where you've been immersed in it over time, you've absorbed all this, and so when it went from fifth to sixth edition, you went in and went, okay, this is different, this is different, this is different, this is different, but it's all still built on all the lore that I've gotten to know over the last 20 years or however long you've been into the game. And so you had to learn some changes, but not the whole thing. Where for someone in a similar place in life to come in and learn the whole thing, it would be quite daunting.
Yeah, and to that, I would say if you do decide you want to dip your toes in and try out full regular whatever the current edition of Shadowrun is, just maybe try out the main rule book and try not to worry about all that other stuff. That's there for you to discover and digest and make use of at a later time when or if you're ready to do it. But it's the thing about role playing games is they're all about your own experience and group. So don't worry so much about all that. Deal with the core rulebook for now, and there's plenty in there to digest and work with, and just kind of find a way to make it your own, and not worry so much about all that lore. It's not super important. I mean, there's a lot of fun detail there, and it can be very enriching. But when it comes to the point where it feels like it's a drag on someone who's coming to it new, kick it to the curb. is what I think is the best thing to do. Well, or maybe listen to the Neo-Anarchist podcast, because he presents it in a way that's in character and a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I have listened to his work a little bit, not probably as many of his episodes as I did yours, but yeah, like I said, I it's a game in a lot of ways. I really wish I had gotten some time with it earlier in life when I had more time to dedicate to it, because it feels like a game that would benefit greatly from immersing yourself more.
It's one of my life's great loves. So
Oh, and isn't that what gaming's all about, right?
yeah, role playing games is one of my key interests in life, and Shadowrun has been central to that for almost as long as I can remember them. I did get into RPGs before Shadowrun, but not really to the extent until Shadowrun came into my life. So, actually, met my wife through our gaming group, and that was a Shadowrun campaign at the time. So, there's layers of it that go beyond just being a game.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. So, it sounds like we're pretty much wrapped up then.
Yeah, I've just been rambling while you've been letting me go. So,
I'll tell you a secret. That's what this whole podcast is. We just ramble and people
that's
actually listen to us. I don't understand, but
that's my general interview strategy as well. When I have people on us, so sometimes people ask me for detailed lists of questions, like, "Oh crap, I have to try to anticipate something and put it down ahead of time." It's like designing an adventure. You don't know what the heck the players are going to do. All you can really come up with is a starting point and a couple of villains and maybe a setting or two you want to have it happen in. But chances are they're going to go in a completely different direction even than what you anticipate in that.
exactly. That's what I tell people all the time. I said, get a couple of bullet points and be ready to put them in a different gun. I was going to say, if I could trouble you to do one more thing, if you'd like to do it, I'd appreciate it. But if you don't, it's fine. We do a little thing at the end of each show where we do what we call Game of the Week. And all this really is where we just go, be it on drive through or search the memory banks for some oddball, weird, independent, whatever, less known game that we'd like to get on the table and play and just give a quick rundown of it. So if you'd like to participate, like I said, I'd love to have you play what we call Game of the Week. And if not, that's cool too.
Sure. I have not prepared for this.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
But where I was actually going to go today was Stars Without Numbers.
I have heard of that, but I don't think I know much of anything about it.
Well, I don't know a ton about it myself, but it looks interesting because it's set, some 2,100 years in the future. OSR sci-fi game, but it has all kinds, psionics, magic. It looks like, if you want to play a hard sci-fi game without being kind of held to existing lore in the context of, say, a movie or a book series, where, so to speak, go have some fun with sci-fi, but not have to worry about getting all the details right. It looks really cool. And they actually also have a free version of it, which does strip out some of the features of it. Yeah, I mean, it says, to read the little blurb, it says the year is 3200 and mankind's empire lies in ashes. The jump gates fell 600 years ago, severing the links between the myriad worlds of the human diaspora. Now the long isolation of silence falls away as men and women return to the skies above their scattered worlds. Will you be among them once more? So it, like I said, it sounds like a kind of a grim sci-fi, but not, I don't know. It like I said, looks interesting. I've heard about it, but I've never really looked into it.
Yeah, it looks really interesting to me. There's a free version, PDF you can share with your friends. Let's see, it's got AIs, mechs, society creation to customize a world or hab with its own culture and history, with conflicts and fault lines to engage your heroes. Wow, this looks right up my alley. I'm going to add this to my wish list and check out the free version first. But this looks intriguing. I'm actually pretty excited about it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like the whole point of the segment, really, is to exactly go, oh, I didn't know about that.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball on my turn if we're ready for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to go instead on drive-through. I'm going to go on itch.io, which
Okay.
is sort of this indie game creators resource community. There's video games on there, but also a lot of indie tabletop developers will create things on there. You can find a lot of things for free or also for inexpensive. They'll run bundles and game jams, and it's quite the rabbit hole of weirdness and also really innovative and useful stuff. So what I'm going to do, instead of actually pointing to a game product, I'm going to draw attention to a particular site, an individual or developer on there called Wataboo. And for your listeners, I will spell that out: WATABOU. So if you spell that out, go to Wataboo, WATABOU.itch.io. That should pull their site right up. And they've got a bunch of different map or dungeon generator tools that are free, many of which run in browser. You can generate a dungeon map, a medieval fantasy city. You can quickly tweak different aspects of these to customize the map in ways that you like without having to necessarily draw out where exactly the streets or buildings go. There's a village generator with a different art style. Perilous Shores is sort of a fantasy region map generator. There's so many really cool, useful tools for world building. If you're looking, they seem to be a bit more fantasy oriented, but you could also use them for other genres as well. I imagine you might have to imagine the buildings as more sci-fi looking than they appear, but
It looks cool. I was just scanning the page because I am familiar with Itch, but not this particular creator. This does looks like some really neat stuff.
Yeah, so that will be my submission for this. If
That sounds wonderful. I guess then really just need to say thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with us. Unfortunately, you missed most of the Shadowrun discussion, which was what we had originally been going to talk about, but we still had some. Well, Opti and I had a good round about that, and
yeah, it's all right. Opti knows his Shadowrun, so I think we're in good hands. Yeah, I was just gonna say thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, I had a great time talking with you.
Likewise, thank you for spending the time to come on with us. All right, folks, there you have it. A little bit of Shadowrun, a little bit of Gangs of the Undercity, a little bit of Subversion, a little bit of some other stuff. And like I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to put a link to the interview that these gentlemen did with Squad Tactica, where they talk a lot more about Gangs of the Undercity. I'm going to put the link for that episode in the show notes, along with links to all their podcasts, so on and so forth. So with that, be kind and go play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.